Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Good morning, dear listener. I hope you're having a pleasant day. I am enjoying myself on this walk home. It is a temperate morning, I would say in the high 60s or low 70s Fahrenheit, so comfortable weather without a jacket. Looks like it's going to get pretty warm this afternoon, and the sky is kind of hazy this morning, which is fine for walking without getting too warm. It's May 31st, so it's the last day of May. My next episode will be a top of the stack summary, although I probably won't record that until next week. That would be early June. But for today, I wanted to follow up on a conversation I had last time. My last episode was a triple shot, shooting from the hip triple shot about mean card games. And in seeing the response from a couple people in the Pick Up and Deliver Guild forum over on boardgame geek, I thought it might be worthwhile to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say mean. What does that word provide as a definition for a game or as a descriptor of a game? I also just wanted to see what other people think of when they say a game is mean. So I started a thread on boardgame geek. Just says what is a mean game? What does it take for something to be a mean game? And there was a really good conversation for a couple days. I kind of summarized it. So if you wanted to go read the thread carefully, I encourage you to do so. A lot of what I'm summarizing here comes out in response to comments people made. I'm not calling out specific commenters because, one, I didn't have time to go through and pull specific comments, and two, actually just one, I didn't have time to go through and pull specific comments. I did gain a summary of what the thread feels like, and I posted that toward the end of the day yesterday. So that kind of gives an idea of how the thread played out. So I guess as my caveat first, if it sounds like I'm stealing an idea from someone else in the thread, please do consider that I have read the whole thread and those thoughts have integrated. So I give full acknowledgement that some of the things I say may be adapting what other people said in the thread, and I don't mean to cite without quotation or quote without citation, but just the opportunity to do that is lost on me this morning. So hopefully that's forgivable. If you did have an opportunity to comment on the thread, thank you very much for doing that, and I appreciate it. So in reading through the thread, it seems like I identified sort of 4 key ways that people use the term mean. The first is in response to co-ops, and I'm just kind of dismissing this because it's not really what I'm talking about when I say people call a game mean. Like when people talk about ghost stories, they might describe it as vicious or mean. But what they intend there is the idea that the system is difficult, not that people ascribe intention to it. So for me, mean has to, on some level, connect with the idea of intention, perhaps. At least that's where I started. So co-ops that are really vicious, some people call those mean, but I'm not as interested in that. Other people, there was an interesting discussion about the idea that games with direct player versus player conflict are inherently mean. There was a long discussion about chess and the idea that 2 unequal players in chess, one of them could be particularly mean to another. By 2 unequal players in chess could end up with a particularly mean game of chess in which one of them slowly picks off the pieces that belong to the other until they're left just with a king and a couple pawns or something. While I would agree that someone who does this on purpose is mean, I would also suggest that for me, 2-player direct conflict games or 2-player zero-sum games aren't inherently mean. Here's what I mean by that. A zero-sum game, if you know, I don't know my economics really, but this phrase is fairly common. A zero-sum situation is one where when you add everything up, the total comes to 0. In other words, any advantage I get is a detriment to you. So a zero-sum game is one where I am always benefiting from your not benefiting, and vice versa. if you're willing to call a game like that mean, I'm not really sure what distinction there is to be made for games that are particularly mean, because in a zero-sum game, any move you make is going to hurt your opponent. So I'm generally inclined to say that two-player games where the focus is a sort of two-player direct conflict, really, it's pretty hard to say they're mean. For instance, Motainai is a two-player game at default. It does have rules for four, but I think it's meant to be played two-person. Or what's it, Twilight Struggle, or 1960, The Making of a President, where every action I take helps me by hurting you. And I don't know, to call that kind of game mean doesn't feel like it gives flexibility to the word to be applied in a variety of circumstances if any kind of direct player conflict is mean. So I for myself would rule out two-player games, or games where you win by taking down the other player directly, and that's the only way to win. So that leaves two other kinds of categories or ideas that I think make a game mean. One has to do for me with the idea of kicking over a sandcastle. This is a phrase that gets used a lot in certain kinds of games where one of the moves you can make is to take away from things other people have been doing. Right? If it's a game that involves some building or some construction, taking action that undoes some of that construction can feel mean. And I think for me, this is one of the true essences of, well, it's a thing that can make a game play mean, but not necessarily make a particular game mean. So for example, if you're playing Through the Ages and you take a really aggressive military stance and your opponent has not, they could feel like you're being kind of mean because you get to do a lot of things that undo their actions. And if they haven't done much to set themselves up to stop that, you just kind of railroad them. Or you can really undo a lot of the work that they do. So from that perspective, I feel like that gets at the player side of what makes a game mean or not, is do the players get to make choices that allow them to attack, but the game gives you enough options that you feel like you don't have to. And then the last one is a game where the game builds in incentives to attack other players. Particularly, it rewards winning players who attack losing players. Or it's specifically designed around the idea that players should work on their own thing until someone else is about to win, and then they go after them. So, for instance, Munchkin is a good example of a game I would think of generally as pretty mean. Although, again, if the whole game is built around that maneuver, and so while Munchkin is sort of mean, it doesn't feel that mean to me because it doesn't ever present another approach. I feel like when games get described as mean, it's because they reward a particular kind of behavior that involves violating trust, or surprising someone with a maneuver, right? People talk about diplomacy as being mean, or games that have negotiation in which you don't have to honor your maneuver. That feels mean. So as I think about some of the games that I've played that are described as particularly mean, Arboretum comes to mind. I mentioned that last time. I was thinking about what is it that makes Arboretum feel mean. I think it's the surprise. It's this idea that as you're playing Arboretum, you're building up this group of trees and you're trying to score a particular set. And you don't know whether one of your opponents, barring if they picked up a card that got discarded, maybe you know, but you probably don't know whether one of your opponents has the card that stops you from scoring those trees or not, or the cards. And the cruelty of being in that position where the only way you're going to score a particular thing is if you have the biggest card in your hand and you don't know if anyone else has it. When they reveal that they've been holding that since the first draw and they just held it to mess with you, that feels pretty mean. Again, I didn't have that experience of it being a bad play because I knew going in that that's what the game was like. I think when I've had games that feel bad for being mean, it's because the game to me doesn't present itself as a game that encourages that kind of vicious attacking behavior, but allows it. And since my default is not to use that kind of maneuver, when someone else uses it on me, the game ends up feeling mean. Which leads me to my last bit. I think surprise is actually the biggest part of this. I think if you feel like you've achieved something and then someone else does something that gives you a surprise and makes you feel like, and suddenly takes away from the success you thought you had, that feels like a pretty vicious maneuver, and thus makes people think the game is mean, I think. The other part of it is just the player attitudes, right? If you are in a group where critical or direct player conflict is a big part of the game, is a big part of your group, you might agree that a game is mean, but you don't know for certain what makes it mean. Or I should say, you know for certain that other people are going to be mean to you. Versus if there are games that don't have that kind of direct player conflict, then being surprised by that meanness feels really bad, right? Like I mentioned Loop Inc. as a game my wife didn't want to play anymore. Part of that was when we played it, she got stuck not being able to do some things because we ran out of materials, and she felt like the game was being mean, or like I was being mean to her, even though I didn't even intentionally do it. But the confluence of those choices makes for a particularly vicious play experience. So I guess for me, the thing that makes a mean game tolerable is knowing ahead of time that it's mean. If I'm playing a game and I'm told from the beginning, this is a game where you're mean to people, I generally will feel okay to be mean to others and to have been. On the other hand, if I play a game and I don't realize it's mean, that's where the challenge comes in to enjoy it. Well, that's about it for me. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. Let me know about your thoughts about mean games over on Board Game Geek Guild 3269. And I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Let me know about your thoughts about mean games over on Board Game Geek Guild 3269. And I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. The end of these walks is going to be interesting now that I have construction across from my house. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.